Welcome to the MTA International Studios in Silver Spring, Maryland. This is Open Forum. Today we'll be talking about big data. And big data is, imagine all the books in the world stacked is still not big enough. Imagine all the DVDs in the world times 4. You stack those up, it would reach the moon. That's the type of data we're talking about. We're talking about the variety of data, audio, video, text. We're talking about the velocity of data that's available in real time. We're talking about data that's taken in and interpreted in real time, and we're talking about this immense volume of data. And why are we talking about this? We're learning about this because all this data will help us in our homes, whether it's managing our home systems, like our heaters in our homes better, to our cars being more safer, to various other business applications as well as consumer applications, such as in education. If we can count every keystroke for every student and help adapt their learning, imagine how much better students can learn. But there are risks here as well. And we have 3 great experts who will walk us through all this immense knowledge and this new growing field. This is only less than 30 years old. So first, to my right is Irfan Chaudhary. Irfan is a Chief Strategy Officer for a cybersecurity firm. Welcome to the show.
Nice.
From
Thank
Seattle,
you.
Washington.
Thank you.
Next, we have Zaid Mia, who is a principal data engineer with Dell Computers from Southern California. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Next, we have Lillian Taylor through Skype, who is a big data advocate, joining us from Seattle, Washington as well. Welcome, Lillian.
Good morning.
Thank you. All right, Zaid, let's start with you. I try to frame what big data is, and every time I talk about what I think is big data, it's never big enough. What is big data? Let's start there.
So first of all, it's very difficult to explain what big data is because everyone has their own interpretation. But if you look at it in practical terms, it's data that's, as you mentioned, it has to be big, right? The volume has to be very large. So think of social networks like Facebook and Twitter, who are constantly producing content. That has to be analyzed in almost real time. And then that information is then used in a way that can either promote a certain product or a certain idea. So in the case of Twitter, for example, they may be trending topics. In the case of Facebook, they may be targeting certain ads to certain people. But it's not just, and then with social networks, it's also the recommendation engines. So they can recommend who you should friend, which interests you would like. So Amazon is a good example. I think most people, anyone who's done anything online, they've realized that when they're online, they're getting some recommendation that may be scary. Like, how did the computer know that I'm interested in this? It's because they've looked at your browsing history, they looked at the applications you've used, they looked at the people you've communicated with. That's why a lot of these big companies are investing in this technology, like Microsoft, Google, Facebook. They want Apple to a degree. They want this information so they can better serve you as a consumer. So they have their own motive, but ultimately the consumer does benefit because you're getting the right information.
Lillian, you're an advocate for big data. Why are you advocating for big data? Why would you do that? How will this help me in my personal life?
Oh my goodness, there are so many applicable use cases. We're seeing big data leveraged in cancer research, in self-driving automobiles, in education. It's applicable everywhere. Of course, there's marketing and commercial purposes as well, but also in last half I was in government and education and healthcare, and it's.
So what would cancer research do? How does this help cancer research? You're talking about lots and lots and lots of data helping predict outcomes and finding correlations?
There was actually a really fabulous special on 60 Minutes recently, and there's a team of oncologists that look at rare cases and develop treatment plans. But this group of experts with this huge body of knowledge, just the amount of data coming in, I think they said there was almost 11,000 reports coming out every week with trial results and studies and research. And there's just no human way possible to consume that amount of data. So they've fed it in. The system that they were using is Watson. And Watson, I think it can ingest almost 180,000 pages a minute, and then look for those patterns. So, for example, they had one case where it was not able to only see just to detect the pattern for a rare case of leukemia, but because it had the ability to compare the individual health records to this, millions and millions and millions of health records and results, it was also able to pick up a heart condition that they wouldn't have been looking for. And
so we are saving lives because of big data, in other words. That's great.
Absolutely.
And Irfan, how did we do this before? What's changed? Why big data now? This seems fairly recent. What happened before?
Well, I think one of the breakthroughs was cloud computing and the ability.
What is cloud computing?
Cloud computing is the ability for an enterprise, let's say a large company out there, to scale at will their computing power and the ability to store all of this data in the quote-unquote cloud, which is basically...
So before, companies could not take these 180,000 pages per minute and put them anywhere. Now there's a place to put them?
That is exactly right. In the past, you'd be restricted by your own computer data center. And the space at your company, and there's a huge cost associated with just running those data centers. Now, through companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Google that are providing at a very cost-effective rate to be able to store and actually do the computing power, because there's one thing to store the information, then there's another to analyze it, and that takes a lot of
just so I understand the storage, now you can rent space to store, basically, and therefore it's so cheap that you can take more data. Before you were very selective about your data, now you just take it all?
Exactly, and it's just not the fact that you can just rent it, but also scale at a much more cost-effective and efficiently.
So they've got an infinite amount of space.
Yeah, you can literally push a button, and you're given another server. You're given another terabytes of storage space.
Okay, so space is now available, and due to space, we're now able to interpret this data as well?
Much faster, at a much faster rate. And so in the past, it would take maybe days or weeks to analyze such large amounts of data. But now, because you can compute at a scale level, you can go through and compute and analyze that data much faster, in literally seconds or minutes or what have you.
And this is all, Zaid, this is all happening in, from what I understand, the velocity. It's real time, as Lillian said, just in cancer research, 180,000 pages coming in per minute. They're real-time analyzing that with all this power of computing and spitting out results that are showing predictions, predictive and correlation and connecting. This is all happening now?
It's happening, and it's just to piggyback on what Irfan said, was that not only is storage very elastic these days, but also the computing power and the technologies to support that. So for example, big data, one of the biggest technologies is known as Hadoop. And there's different flavors of how to implement that. But the idea behind that is...
So what is Hadoop? Yeah.
Right, so Hadoop is, without getting to too many details, but it allows for large tasks to be broken into simpler tasks, and therefore you can distribute that across multiple machines. So in the past, let's say you had a single machine that processed information. It was very serial. Maybe you could multi-thread it and maybe do some efficiency. It was
a lot slower.
But it was very slow. But now you can immediately open up as many resources and many computers as you have available to you and do that. So to give you an example, one of the first companies obviously was Google, and Hadoop was really a byproduct of some of the technologies that Google was using to do all its indexing for the internet. But a more concrete example is New York Times. They were able to digitally convert all their, catalog their newspapers, all their old newspapers within 3 days. And they did that through these technologies and the power of cloud computing. So there's definitely...
So because you're distributing it, it's not one machine that's running all this stuff. You got more horsepower because you're distributing it into multiple machines. And
another way to look at it is if you have to, let's say for a very mundane task, but you have to rewrite a book, right? So you can give one person to rewrite the book, or you can take each page, tear up the pages from the book and give it to 1,000 people, and they'll do it all in the same time. If it takes 1 minute, for every person do it, then the entire book can be written in 1 minute.
1 minute. I see. That's a great analogy. So I'm getting it, and I'm not a technologist. I'm getting it that big data will help the world in various ways, from cancer to education to other things. And there's leaps in technology. Cloud computing, where you can rent space offsite and ingest as much data as you want at a very low price. There's new methods called Hadoop, where you can distribute the work so you can interpret it a lot in minutes versus days and years, and do it a lot quicker. So now let's transition to how will this help me in my life. Can each of you give an example? And Lillian, we'll start. You gave a great example in cancer research, but give me another example of how will big data help me in my life?
Well, I need to know more about your life to something personalized. But obviously having the accessibility to go through all that, like I said, medical records, educational records, and finding patterns. But I've seen even the ability to look at like your last 200 tweets and develop, what your personality is and what is appealing to you. And for your service providers to be able to cater to that and give you what you need. And there's a little bit of controversy about getting into a bubble and not seeing the things outside of that. But anything from running your home, or Staples just released their Easy button, and based on your purchase history, you can simply, tap into it and say, I need blue pens. And it will automatically order you what you need. OnStar in the 2017 GM models will help you route your way to work, and your prescription's ready. Let's pick that up and route that in there. Let's order your coffee ahead of time. Let's pick out your favorite music. It's pretty amazing.
That's fascinating. So they're gathering. That's great. So tell me more about cars and autonomous vehicles. Now, are cars going to be safer because of big data?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's a hope, but yeah, because the idea behind autonomous cars or anything with artificial intelligence is the more data you have, the better the more confidence you have in the results of that. And if you think about a car has to make a lot of decisions. I mean, humans make that decisions too, but sometimes that's why we have accidents, because we make the wrong decisions. But if the car can make these decisions accurately, and they can communicate with each other, all the other cars and other things on the road, then obviously it's going to be safer. I just want to mention, you mentioned about how these things can help in your personal life. A year ago, I think Google actually, a Gmail application now has this ability where no matter what the email is, whatever the subject is, body is, at the bottom of your email, it'll give you 3 automatic replies that you can just click on, and it'll write up the reply for you. So it can be something very complicated. For example, you can get an email about finance and budgeting and say, and it can be a very long email, and then the reply could be, yes, let's do this tonight, or I'll have it ready by tomorrow. So it can interpret the message and automatically provide you the response, so you don't have to actually. So some people look at it as an ease, individually. Yeah, that's great, and oftentimes it is, because oftentimes the emails that you're getting, you just want to say, a quick reply. You don't need to have a detailed reply. And so there's an example of what's called text analytics, where you have to understand the context of words, you have to understand the sentiment of the user, and yet have the ability to actually have accurate replies.
Great example. Right? That's a great example. That would make my life a lot easier. Irfan, how else can this help me?
Well, I think Lillian hit the point in terms of healthcare. So as a consumer out there, what's going on is this idea of taking our medical records and making them electronic health records now. In the past, our doctors would have to write everything down on a paper sheet and file that in a folder in the medical office. Now, everything's being recorded electronically, and some medical institutes are now storing that and analyzing that. And so how does it impact, an individual? Well, now your doctor can get ahead of, say, disease predicting if you're susceptible susceptible to a particular disease. For example, let's say you're pre-diabetic, and now they can see that from, say, some tests that they've collected on you.
So I happen to have an Apple Watch.
Yeah.
I hear that they're storing my heart rate history and capturing all that, and that they can not. For anyone who buys one, and they're actually capturing that data and they're sending it, analyzing it to predict certain disease?
Well, I think there's the possibility for it. Okay. Obviously, that takes a lot of coordination between Apple and the healthcare institute that you're signed up for and your health insurance company. But the idea you had asked, hey, how does this impact an individual? And so as an individual, I know I'll get better medical coverage in the sense of, the quality of healthcare will go up because my doctors will have much better access to data that they can analyze and look at to try and prevent disease, for example.
That's great. And then Lillian, can you tell us a little bit about the education example?
Well, yes, and actually, I was going to revisit just a little bit on the self-driving cars. At World of Watson, there was a gentleman speaking, I believe he's from Udacity, and he was explaining that, as we humans learn to drive, we make a mistake and we learn from it. But our son, our daughter, our brother, they need to make that same mistake. With the self-driving cars, once one car makes a mistake, it shares the knowledge with the other, and every newborn baby car comes with this collective knowledge, and so it becomes exponentially better and better and beyond what human capacity could do. So eventually it will be much safer, which is exciting, and
it will decrease the amount of accidents and by mistakes as well, right?
Right, exactly. And even in my car right now, I have the visual analytics for, safe traveling distance. And, if there's something from the camera that shows is approaching too quickly, it will brake for me or alert me, which is nice. And I loved it when my husband was driving, because then I didn't have to be the backseat driver. The car would tell him. So that was fantastic.
Tesla and Ford and other companies are making great progress in this, and eventually, getting to this level 5 where they'll just take me to work, drop me off, and come back and pick up the kids and take them to school. I mean, all this is going to happen, right?
Very Minority Report. If you ever watch that movie, a lot of that technology, I think, is right on the cusp, except for maybe the cognitives in the pool of water. But
so let's that's a good transition to let's talk about the challenges here. Staying with cars for a second, Uber is a good example. They started with 0 drivers. They're going to go up to 11 million drivers, and then their goal is come back down to 0. So what happens to those 11 million people that are currently Uber drivers? They're already cutting costs, right? A lot of us use these ride-sharing apps, these help that they're putting lots of other businesses out of business. But eventually, these drivers will need to go away. And I assume all big data is going to help in this progress. How should I be thinking about big data in terms of the value of humans? We're talking about, just give you one more example, minimum wage, and how McDonald's is thinking about putting, self-ordering, and so jobs will go away. How do people adapt to make sure they're able to participate in this new economy as well?
So there was a fantastic article, I think it was released a couple of days ago. Ginny Rometty was talking about the new collar jobs. And the vocational training in these areas. And I know they had P-Tech High School in New York started. And these are available now. Like, you can go onto the web and you can look at Big Data University and you can start to train. And there's an online STEM high school that's available. So it's exciting, because a lot of the repetitive things that we're seeing now that people are doing in minimum wage jobs or customer service jobs, as these become easily automated, or what we call augmented intelligence, where these can be processed more easily, humans can transfer into these higher touch, higher value roles where you have the human connection is necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. So Zaid, you're an example of when you were in college, undergrad, I assume big data didn't even was just an early thought. How did now you work in the space? How do you see students today in middle school, high school, or people who are in their careers adapting?
Well, so I think analytics or data, everyone needs to have a basic understanding of analytics anyway, even if it's not very hardcore science. You don't have to understand programming languages or mathematical models to understand analytics, but in general, you should be able to understand arguments, that politicians make, or in your household, if you were talking to someone.
Didn't a presidential candidate use big data? President Obama?
When President Obama was running in 2008, he had one of the most tech-savvy campaigns, and they used this data very efficiently. They knew exactly who the donors were, what they liked, what their message was, how to talk to them. I mean, they really had this thing. That's how President Obama was able to reach to these rural areas that was very difficult for him.
And leveraging, but being on the other end of that, receiving those emails, I feel good about myself. He understands me, but yet he's using tools, and so there's some concern. So let's transition now to the risks and the challenges. Sure. This, in some ways, this is the classic big brother watching me. This is, is my data safe? Am I secure? If they have all this information, and this could be used for negative purposes. One example is by governments.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of risks that exist at multiple levels. You have the risk of large enterprises, and how are they collecting the data, and then what are they doing with it? Are they basically treating the data the way they promised the consumer they would, which was to safeguard it and only use it for a limited set of purposes, for example. And they may have the best intentions in the world, but it takes just one event, one hacker to come in and basically, get access to that information. And unlike in decades past, where it was a limited amount of volume, now you're talking about, millions and millions of records.
I've heard a quote by the former CEO of Cisco. Either you've been hacked, or you don't know you've been hacked.
Exactly.
So, and all my data is now in a cloud somewhere, and there's people who are getting access to it. Should I allow my data to even go up there?
Well, at the end of the day, it's very difficult to prevent your data from being collected the way you interact with the internet and the various services and tools. I mean, many companies do give you the option to opt out, meaning, yes, I do not want you to collect this type of information on me, but for you to get the full set of services that they have to offer, you need to provide that information.
Give before you get. So as a consumer, what are some of my safeguards?
Well, you just need to really understand, what is this information? What information am I giving?
How do I understand this? I mean Google. I use Google. I didn't even know they were analyzing my emails.
Yeah. So sometimes it's a little bit more difficult because it's not so upfront. But for example, when you go sign and register for a website, you're giving certain information, and you're typically marking a checkbox saying, yes, go ahead and use this to market other information to me. And sometimes you want to deselect that so you don't get all those marketing and sales emails, as an example, right? But it's just really understanding and recognizing how many sites are you signing up for, which ones are you signing up for, who are you giving your information to. That's one way to start. But to your earlier point, it is very difficult now because in order for you to again, sometimes it's not very clear what is being collected. But that is part of the risk. I mean, with the great benefits of big data, there's also
some challenges. So Zayed, privacy. Dig deeper. I mean, most people want to help me with this data and hopefully make money off me in terms of advertising things to me. But tell me how government is using this data.
Well, so the government, but let me just example that you mentioned earlier with the watch and your biometric information, right? So certainly insurances, your health provider will be able to benefit you, provide you the right benefit, the right medications or whatever, exercise plans. But then there's also the sort of dark side of that, which is that what if they can predict that you're likely to get diabetes or sick or cancer or something like that, right? Then what if they don't want to insure you anymore, right? Or they cut off access immediately at that point. So there's other things like that. other issues
Great
like
example.
that. But that's one aspect of it. And the other thing about governments are, it's one thing to say that, let's take an example of the United States government. We have certain checks and balances in this country. Even despite that, there are cases of abuses of data. But look at other countries. Let's look at, for example, even England. They just passed a very comprehensive surveillance law that they can monitor anyone they want. And the idea is not that they're monitoring someone because of some illegal activity. The idea is that if someone is doing anything that you can use to blackmail them or embarrass them, then that becomes a tool of basically quieting the opposition. So that's where some of these challenges are, and it's becoming more and more apparent.
Ethics and values and peace and justice are gonna
yeah, I mean,
play a big
there was
role.
actually a case. It's well known now that the NSA was monitoring Muslim leaders who were speaking out against the atrocities, in Muslim countries, and they were basically going to release their web browsing activities to embarrass them, right? So let's say someone is engaging in an illicit affair online somewhere, but that's has nothing to do with their politics. But now they have the power to release that information and basically threaten their livelihood or whatever their careers are. So it becomes a tool to quiet
That's scary.
dissent.
So and from a Muslim perspective, His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the leader of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, has talked about peace and justice in the world, and seemed like it's not just military. There's data engaged in that as well.
Right.
Lillian, closing thoughts. How can I be safer online with the advent of big data?
Well, there are a lot of companies addressing this with data privacy and data masking and the ability to analyze the data. For example, the IBM purchased Truven, which has the medical history of like 3,000 lives, or 300 million, I'm sorry, lives. But that information is masked. So while you can analyze it, the protections of the individual are there. And that's something that is being addressed, and the technology is available. And it's just a matter of, knowledge is power, data is power. It's how you wield it. So I don't know how much time I have here, but
that's great. That's a great responsibility, and I appreciate it. Zaid, any closing thoughts? 30 seconds on what, as a consumer, how should I protect myself and keep safe?
Well, I think when it comes to online behavior, they always recommend that don't say anything online that you wouldn't say in your normal conversation. So just because you're hiding behind a login or some other masked email, somehow or another they will know who you are.
They'll find you. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's a technology called Tor browser. The student sent a bomb threat because he was at actually Harvard. He didn't want to take the test or something. And supposedly this technology cannot be traced back, but they traced it back to him. So just because you think you're trying to outsmart the system, if they want to find you, they'll find you.
Irfan, closing thoughts?
I think with any great tool that is entered into our life, we just need to recognize there's risks and rewards to it, and just really doing our best to educate. So whoever you're doing business with as a consumer, typically they've got information on their website that says, how am I managing or handling your data? To Lillian's point, there's a lot of things companies are doing. Just educate yourself as much as you can.
Great. Thank you guys for being on the show. It's really helpful. We learned about big data. We learned about how it's taken in, how it's interpreted, how it's used by big companies and small companies now. And most importantly, how do we keep safe online in the advent of a new way of how you're being monitored. Thank you for being on Open Forum, and hopefully we'll see you next time. This is the MTA International Studios in Silver Spring, Maryland.